And I feel like what I've done with Jason and the Contractor Distributor Show in some ways is just showing up. But we know, because you guys made it easy for us, all we really had to do was show up and start talking about stuff we know about. And then hopefully some people listened. And hopefully it's that easy for everyone.
Let's Get This Podcast Started is a production of Get a Grip Studios. Go to getagripstudios.com. Welcome back to the Let's Get This Podcast Started podcast. Today, I'm with my friend and colleague, Chad Palmer of Energy Efficient. It's a lighting distributor in the States, and he's one of the co-hosts with Jason Chambry on the Contractor and Distributor Show. And I was looking for somebody originally to complement Jason's kind of bombastic style but had a lot of history in lighting and as a distributor. And so that's how the Contractor Distributor show was formed. And I don't know, how many episodes have you guys done, Chad? Welcome to the show, by the way.
Yeah. Hey, how are you? I think I lost track. It's one a month and we did it for over a year. So I'm guessing 15, 20, somewhere in there. I'm not really positive. You lose track of it after a while, In our podcast, we intentionally made them shorter. They weren't like long form style, and so they went by rather quickly. And there were days, I think it was here the last few months, we started doing a couple at a time just to help with timing and that. But yeah, it's exciting to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Have you? Yeah, no problem. So have you actually had an interaction or something happen with someone that you've never met, don't know, but has listened to your show? Has that happened to you?
No, well, no, not a stranger. I've had friends come up to me and say that they had seen something or had watched it or something like that and thought it was cool, that kind of thing. But I haven't had that like walking through a trade show and someone goes, "Hey, aren't you?" No, I haven't had that. Now, Jason's much more famous than I am. I'm just, So he may have.
I think he promotes it more on social media than you.
That could be.
Yeah, but you know what? It's interesting because it does belong on LinkedIn. There'd be nothing wrong or out of line with posting links to those shows on your LinkedIn. On Facebook and Instagram, it might look a little bit weird. But, on LinkedIn, that's where that kind of content belongs. And I think Jason's been very kind of conscientious about reposting the show to LinkedIn. I'll tell you this, the listenership.
That's a great idea.
The listenership of the Contractor Distributor Show is, you guys were hunting Greg and I down for a bit. I don't know if you remember back last year when we were doing
I didn't know
shows
that.
From the year. Yeah, there was 3 Contractor Distributor shows in the top 10 or 4 maybe.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So,
oh gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so your guys' stuff has been fairly popular on the old Lighthead. So Lighthead is closed
now. So if we had 2 listeners, you guys had what, 3 or 4?
Yeah, something like that. No, it's I would say this is probably about 700 or 800 people.
Okay.
For each of those top shows.
Awesome.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe 1,100 on a big one would be a full, 65, 75% view of the show. When
someone starts a podcast, what would be a realistic goal, for something like that?
Well, it's interesting because, sometimes when we're, so I've trained, I wouldn't say lots of podcasters, but maybe a dozen. Okay. So, and I've got them up and running and launched them and when people are talking about a specific subject matter expertise, that is from an industry that is critical infrastructure, medical, transportation, high value sales stuff, the listenership is extremely valuable. Okay. So the example I like to give is if you were an orthopedic surgeon and you were talking to other orthopedic surgeons about orthopedic surgery, and you had 95 orthopedic surgeons listen to your show who influenced the sales of 40 or 50 million dollars worth of equipment to their hospital, or can buy the new piece of thing that's $6 million from Alcon or one of these, I don't know, medical companies. I shouldn't say a name, but Alcon's,
Right.
everyone knows Alcon because of the contact lenses, but they also make high-end surgical equipment, right? That's very
Okay.
expensive. So if you could put together a podcast that you could show them a lot of these subject matter experts that influence or make direct decisions on buying lighting equipment, it's very valuable to advertisers at a rate much higher than a general interest podcast. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
So yeah, so like my daughter posting a video about something she did over the weekend and getting 1 million views is still basically worthless because there's no real content there, and she's not influencing someone to do something. Where 95 orthopedic surgeons, that's influence.
Yeah. So like, for example, if 1,600 people listen to a Get a Grip on Lighting podcast and they listen to 85% of it, right, on average, or
Yeah.
95% of it on average, that's very valuable to a lighting manufacturing company because
Yeah, I would think so.
they know that the people listening to it are not are either make or influence those kinds of decisions, and so that's a good advertising opportunity. It's a really sharp advertising opportunity for them. It's a good way to use their money for if they
And
want to do
is that
marketing.
is that the right advice to someone wanting to start a podcast? I know I had my intentions when we first started, but to really know what that audience is that you want to speak to, right? Or is the goal to just blab about what you know a lot about, or is the goal to monetize that podcast in some way? I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I'm supposed to be doing the interview here, but
This is how it works with Jason and I. I'm just curious. I
no,
always
no,
want to
no, great,
know.
no, great
And
question.
he
So
tends to know stuff.
yeah, so but no, but here's the thing. Here's what's interesting. So what you're asking, okay, is whether are you a podcast host or are you a podcast guest? So on the Contractor Distributor Show, it might be 70-30 you to Jason or something like that, or 50-50 or 60-40,
Yeah.
right? But both of you are the host and both of you are the guest on that show, which is why you have to keep the frequency down a little bit or you'll exhaust your ideas. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
but if you wanted to go full blown weekly show, bi-weekly show like me, I'm doing so many podcasts every week, or we do at least one a week, Get a Grip on Lighting, and then Lightheads and Restoring Darkness and all these other shows. If you have to really be a podcast host, because nobody has that much content before you
Right.
start
Yeah.
repeating yourself,
Sure. Yeah. Understood.
right?
And that's when you're starting to. That's when you should bring in the, guest speakers or guest commentators, that sort of
No,
thing.
because a lot of people that want to start a podcast, Chad, it's actually they want to be a podcast guest. They want to be asked the questions. They have something to say to the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in that case, I would recommend that they do a series so they can have an off ramp where they don't fail. The podcast didn't stop. They just did 12 episodes of the series. Or you know what? Jason and I co-hosted the Contractor Distributor Show and it came to an end or whatever. There's no like,
Yeah.
I'm starting a podcast, putting a flag in the ground and giving up. It's just, you swerved into this world a little bit as a co-collaboration host with Jason, or you decided to do a series and you exhausted what you had to say about lighting or whatever it is. And so you have to, it's better to start off incrementally because podcasting can be very exhausting for people, especially if they're doing their own recording, distribution, guest booking.
Yeah.
You see how much work Scott does, right?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, your studios made it easy for me. I would assume Jason the same way. I mean, the hardest part for us was really just making a date to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then being, with our busy schedules, having these pesky customers always wanting to buy stuff from us, we have to work around that. And So you guys, your studios made it so much easier. I couldn't even possibly imagine all the effort that goes into making it professional, getting a professional level podcast with the video and the good audio. And Scott's always, tweaking how it sounds and making sure it sounds well and that the lighting's good and that sort of thing. But without that, I don't know that I would even started my own, completely on my own. There's no way. But it was fun. This Contractor Distributor Show has been fun for me in from a perspective that I get to ask questions of a contractor, and I'm hoping that Jason feels the same way. We get to ask questions of each other in these different roles that we were maybe just never had the opportunity to ask that level of person about. When I was asking him what publications does he read, well, it seems like that sort of thing is something people were interested in knowing. Is what. And then when he answered, I'll never forget him answering. He's like, I don't read anything, that's in print. I'm like, wow, I guess there is a age difference between the two of us. That's why when you said that about LinkedIn, it kept me thinking, it's like, must be an age thing, because social media, I don't even think about it. It's not even on my, it's not something I even comes to my mind like, oh, I should do this or look there. Not even once. Now, and I didn't even think twice about posting that thing on LinkedIn. I sent it to Facebook to my family so that they seen what we were doing. And
I'm famous now.
Like, hey, what a big deal. Yes. But that's just I think that's my age group, and how we treat social media. It's not our outlet. It's not where we get that information.
How old are you? Let's just put it on the table.
I'll be 56 this year. Yeah.
Well, you look at this guy. He looks so young. Look at me. I'm gray. I'm bald. Look at the hair on this guy. Holy mackerel! You look great.
It must be all the beer and liquor,
Oh, so watch it. Listen. So watch it. So, okay. So this is exactly what I try to tell people that come into the studio or come and talk to me about podcasting, and I say, look it. We try to Get a Grip Studios tries to fit it, like, be as professional as possible in the virtual Zoom world without Zoom and Google Meet, but like making it convenient. You don't have to come here. Okay. Which is super important. Nobody wants to drive somewhere, right? The second thing is that you don't have to book guests. You don't have to post stuff. You don't have to produce stuff. You don't have to chase advertisements. You don't have to do all these other things that that are actually somebody's full-time job. This is what Scott does for a living, is audio visual podcast production all day long. He's going to be a lot better at it than some amateur that downloaded an app. You know what I'm saying? So
absolutely.
If you're going to try to do that, you're going to trip up. You know what I'm saying? That's where why most podcasts have 1 to 5 episodes. Because it's exhausting to produce.
Oh, that's interesting. That's fascinating. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple rules. Most good podcast ideas never become podcasts. 2, most good podcast ideas have single-digit number of episodes because the production is way more than people think it is. Right?
Yeah.
So that's the key. The final thought I have before we turn it back over to you is that when you're creating a subject matter expertise podcast, the chances of you being actually a legitimate subject matter expertise and not being in your 40s or 50s is really low. Okay? It takes time to become a subject matter expertise on it. And also, that probably means that you know nothing about social media or podcast production. You probably know a lot about lighting distribution.
There's a good chance.
Or whatever, electrical contracting, or whatever it is, right? Or orthopedic surgery. And you don't have the time or the inclination to get involved in audio video production. And that becomes a huge barrier for people because they always think they want to bootstrap their podcast and do it themselves. And that's a big mistake, Chad.
Turn your plans into a pilot. Visit getagripstudios.com or call 416-492-5835 for more information.
One of the things that I was wondering too, I was going to ask you early on was, how do you track your your watchers, your listeners, your followers, whatever they're called, is there because you're releasing it to a lot of different outlets, right? It's not just released one way. Does it all culminate somewhere? You know what I mean? Where that you're up to 1,102 views now, or 10,001. Is there a way to? Is there a counter that runs somewhere?
That's a great question. So Scott Griffin. Have you met Scott Wachter? Have you met Scott Wachter? He does the Lighting Industry News Brief, right? So what Scott Wachter does is every week he goes to there's about 6 or 7 different places he has to go to check. They look at viewing statistics, downloads, impressions, and then press plays and listen time. So there's all manner of different statistics that he will track and then bring together and give to a particular advertiser. If somebody's a one-off advertiser, we're not going to put that kind of effort into it. But to the major people that advertise with us, Light Efficient Design, Keystone Technologies, Satco, these types of people, he'll provide them with their listener statistics for the Lighting Industry News Brief, because it's a podcast and a video show and a news brief. So they want the opens and the listens and the views of that.
Yeah.
And then but you have to remember that we're not talking about like viral lighting industry podcast is like 6,000 views. That would be, or listens, press plays. That's an absolutely viral podcast. There's not 6,000 podcast listeners in the lighting industry. If you get 6,000 listeners of a podcast or a show, you've attracted people that have never listened to a lighting podcast before. They're just interested in this for some reason. It went viral, right? So that's happened a couple times with us. But yeah, so it's very difficult to track stats. It's not easy. Everybody thinks it's as easy as the YouTube counter. No, we have to go in and dig into it and listen time and everything else. So yeah, Scott Wachter does that.
Well, yeah. And you brought up another thing that, if you're doing it on your own, my goodness, do you have time for that?
Oh my God.
No way. Not unless that's your full-time job, to do the podcast. And if most people are like Jason and I, we have our full-time gig. This is just something we do for fun,
Sure.
There's no way you would put that kind of time into it. And if you aren't willing to do that, you're not going to get sponsors. And then you're definitely not going to monetize your podcast.
Yeah, the question becomes like another question I would ask. Remember how we talked about, are you a podcast guest or a podcast host, right? So a lot of people I actually turn around and send on their way, because I know that what they want to do is they have something to say. And so they need to be interviewed. They need to be talked to. They want to answer questions. They feel like they've been through this career, or they have something to say, to whether that's to women, young women that are coming up in advice, whether that's to people in their community that are doing something, or something in their subject matter expertise. They've hit a point in life where they want to write their book or say their piece or whatever. Those people should not start podcasts.
And is podcast? What's the word I want to use? I want to relate it. You said books, and it reminded me of it, because I was just listening. I guess one of the podcasts I listen to is a radio show on NPR called Marketplace. And It's funny because it started out as a radio show, and now they are advertising themselves as a podcast. But they were talking about how the book industry and how tough it is to be to actually get seen. There's millions of books that get published every year, but only so many of them actually get read or seen or on the shelf at B. Dalton booksellers or what have you. Is there something like that in podcasting as well?
Yes, there's something like that in the universe. So what you're going to find out is there's 2 ways of calculating it. But the one I always remember, the name is Pareto distribution. So if you research a Pareto distribution, what it says is that if you get the slice of the universe right, 90% of everything will go to less than 10%. So for example, Jupiter has 90% of all the mass of planets in our, 85% of all the mass of all the planets in our galaxy in our solar system is in Jupiter, right? And then 90% of all the mass in our solar system is in the sun. Right, so of all the planets, it's Jupiter. You get the slice correctly. You find there's a Pareto distribution. And at each step, it's like a curve like this, right? So for example, over 90% of all the less than 10% of all the people that play basketball get paid to play basketball, right? So if you actually get paid to play basketball, you are for sure in the top 10% of all basketball players. Okay. So then if you
Just
take that,
getting to that level.
that's right. You got paid. Somebody actually paid you to bounce a ball on the ground. If you take all the people that get paid to play basketball, 90% of all the 10% of all the people that get paid to play basketball get 90% of all the money. Right. So
that I would believe.
This slice of reality, Pareto distribution, there's another name for it. It goes in the other direction, but I can't remember what it is. So with podcasts, so for example, I would argue that of all English language podcasts on lighting, Get a Grip on Lighting probably produces 90% of them, of all the listens. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you were to say, I want to know everything about lighting industry, not lighting design, whatever, but I mean, even lighting design, I would say that of all the podcasts ever produced on lighting, Get a Grip produced 90% of them, right? You understand what I mean? So if you're looking at for these slices of reality, what you notice is that the gains inure to one side. That's called the Matthew principle as well. To whom much is given, more will be given, and they shall have an abundance. But to him who has
just
not,
a wealth of knowledge.
No, but
is this like you have one of those calendars? Every day it's another little nugget.
I read a lot of books, though. I read a lot of books, but the point is that so you have these different theories, and so when it comes to lighting podcasts, we have a little tiny Pareto distribution. Now it's not that valuable. I wish it was a heck of a lot more valuable, Chad.
Right.
But
you got to learn to play basketball.
Yeah. Well, there's the big bucks, right? But even so, you think about it, if you watch a UFC event, okay, you watch the UFC, people climbing into a cage to pound each other's heads in, okay, that's crazy, okay, can we?
Right. Oh yeah, I agree, 100% agree.
Okay, so you see those guys, they've made it to the UFC, they're tough guys, tough hombres, right? They're fighting in the UFC. It's tough. They might be getting $5,000 if they're on the preliminary card.
Yeah.
Right, but the guy that fights in the championship fight, he gets him $2 million. Same thing.
Yeah.
Everywhere you look, there's a Pareto distribution. So one of the keys to life is really accelerating through those kinds of moments where those things exist. And we've been able to do that here with Greg and Scott and the team and everybody here. We've really worked hard on that, and I think people can see the results.
Absolutely. The just doing it, half of getting there. I don't know what the correct way to say this is, but just showing up is part of it, right? But you guys have taken it a lot further than that, and I feel like what I've done with Jason and the Contractor Distributor Show in some ways is just showing up. But we know, because you guys made it easy for us. All we really had to do was show up and start talking about stuff we know about, and then hopefully some people listened. And hopefully it's that easy for everyone.
Need to check with an expert before you start recording? Get a Grip Studios offers consultation services. Visit getagripstudios.com for more.
Well, I think a lot of people that, it's interesting because I would say that people in your and Jason's position, had you been thinking about starting a podcast, or had it occurred to you to start a podcast before doing the Contractor Distributor Show, it's probably most likely that you don't want to do any more than you're already doing. It's this is a fun level. I like it. I enjoy it. But any more than this, and it's going to be too much. It's going to be hard to make money. Yeah, it's going to be hard to make enough money to do this enough. And so I always counsel people when I'm talking to them, let's have an off ramp. Let's not make a big flag in the ground where I'm starting a podcast, right? That's a major commitment. Let's do a little series. Let's do a pilot show. Let's do a show on Lighthead, the Contractor Distributor Show. See what happens once a month. Easy, half an hour. And if we can make that happen for people, then a lot of times they get that podcast bug out of them. They know what it's about. They know how much work it is to do a 15-minute show a month. And that's probably enough. You know what I mean for them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, kind of a closing question for me would be, because I'm always curious. Do you have a podcast that you listen to religiously?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of podcasts. And, you know, what is a podcast in 2024 is a good question. My favorite show right now is Judging Freedom with Judge Andrew Napolitano.
Oh, really?
I probably listen to about 10 hours a week. And the reason why I listen to that show is because Judge Napolitano prosecutes it like a trial. He's a judge.
Oh, that is interesting. Yeah.
Okay. And also, he has a cadre of guests that are extremely qualified. So, he every week on his show, he has Professor John Mersheimer every week. He has Professor Jeffrey Sachs. He has Colonel Douglas McGregor. He has Professor Gilbert Doctorow. He has like
This is quite
major.
a this is quite a cast.
Oh yeah, this is probably the now it's still American, and I say that with contempt because Americans have the most even Mearsheimer and Sachs, who are like major geopolitical strategists and can speak to the history of anything, say 20th century, like Mao and the Cultural Revolution in China and the Chinese Revolution pre-Second World War and after, all the different intricacies of history that weave their way through. They still have a very American worldview. And the American worldview is toxic in 2024. It's really bad. The way America views anything outside of America is always, the way Americans view it is always, I don't know how to put it the right way, as the elephant in the room. You know what I'm saying? Like we dictate what other people should be doing in other countries.
We have our view of what things should be, and
exactly
anyone who doesn't like that is just not doing it the way it should be done.
Yeah, like and you could call it realist philosophy by Mersheimer. Like he would say something like, Iran cannot threaten the United States, and people would be like, why not? They can because America would lay waste to Iran. Like that's not a question. That's a certainty of geopolitical warfare, right? So if somebody says, no, Iran wants to go to war with the United States, only an American would say something stupid like that. There's no chance that Iran wants to go to war with the United States. Iran knows more than anyone else that if it goes to war with the United States, their country will be laid waste.
Absolutely.
Right? And so so that's the one I listen to the most, but I wish there was one that had more of a international perspective. I'd love to listen to a podcast where,
you have to find that character though. That have a character that is that worldly, that isn't steeped in Canadian history or American history or whatever it may be.
Oh, that's not the problem. No, that's not the problem. The problem is that anyone that's not American is terrified of saying anything about America. Like I love it when Americans laugh at the Canadian Armed Forces. So for example, Americans will say, Canada even has an army? The reality is that Canada is not allowed to have an army that can threaten America. Like if Canada made an army that is actually really big and threatening, America would say, you need to disband that army.
Yeah, or we're not going to be buddies anymore, right?
Exactly. Well, that's what they did with the Avro Arrow, right? In the 50s, Canada produced a fighter jet that was way superior to every American fighter jet ever produced and generations ahead. And the American Secretary of State said, you guys have to cancel the program. Why? Because you can't threaten the United States of America.
Because when you're listening to these podcasts, do you find yourself breaking them down?
Oh,
Like,
totally.
yeah,
Oh, technically as a podcast?
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Like
As a podcaster,
Joe
yeah.
Rogan is probably has become the worst podcaster in the world. If you look
You think
at,
so?
oh, yeah, if you look at how much he talks on his show compared to his guest, it's
Oh, yeah.
it's like probably at a minimum 50-50, if not 60-70-40 to Rogan. He's getting worse. Another one that's really bad now is Jordan Peterson. These guys, these original kind of whatever dark web podcasters or alt-right or alternative news. Russell Brand's another one of these guys out there that are kind of counter-narrative types or whatever. The problem with them is they spend so much time talking on their own show.
Yeah. It was like the old Rush Limbaugh radio show. I don't know if you were a fan of his or not, but he was the same way. It was all about just him repeating his views. And but I think that's where that must be where the podcaster gets to, though. Like at that point, they're listening to hear you, Michael Colligan, speak, not so much the guest. They want to see how you interact with that guest and what your views are on what that guest knows. And I feel like that's probably where like Joe is at. I know I listen to him sometimes for that reason. Some of those other fellows, Rush Limbaugh was one that I listened to every day at lunchtime back in the day. And it was always to hear what his view was on what was happening. It's kind of the same thing with people listening to you, for example, on Get a Grip on lighting. They may just they're listening to hear you speak from your perspective about that particular subject. And your guest just happens to be the person that helps, facilitate that conversation in a way. Because I think, I know I enjoy listening to you and Greg both from that perspective as well. So maybe that's an evolution in a podcaster's life cycle, is you get to the point to where they just want to hear you. They want to hear what you're going to say about whatever that subject may be, like restoring darkness or whatever it may be, or Joe Rogan when he's talking to Elon Musk, or who knows who he's talking to. But you get to the point where you just want to hear what they would say when they get that guest in the room.
When Joe Rogan is a podcast guest unto himself, like Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with a Rush Limbaugh, which is interesting, one of the reasons why our society is going through this fractious culture phase, where there seems to be a lot of tension in the culture, is because of this new media. And while people may be, because they can find something other than Rush that's maybe better than Rush. They never had a chance in the past. They had
we didn't have any. I mean, you had 2 or 3 radio stations, and that was it.
That was it, right?
You're right?
And so whether you liked Rush or hate Rush or whoever Chris Cuomo or Rachel Maddow or Tucker Carlson, pick your poison. I don't care. The point is that that's all you really had. And with the new world now, you can see people that are subject matter experts instead of Rush Limbaugh. And I don't mean to criticize Rush here personally or Tucker or anything else like that. But if we're going to talk about geopolitics, I want to listen to Mersheimer, okay?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. No, I see your point.
You know what I mean? And so now we're seeing the elevation of actual subject matter expertise because of the decrease in cost of publication, right? So in your case, your platform's free to you. You don't pay for it, but you don't get paid. So it's like your platform's free, but it doesn't generate enough value to pay you, but you don't have to do any of the production. You just have to show up, and it's fun in 15, 20 minutes, right?
Right.
Whereas, Napolitano, he's at the level now where I'm pretty sure he's paying Mersheimer to come on every week. I can't imagine that these people are coming in. They're very busy. They're meeting with the president of Vietnam after they're done Napolitano's show. You understand what I mean?
Right.
They're going to go and get paid by the government of China to talk to President Xi, or the president of Taiwan, or, the president of the Philippines to talk about financial and economic strategy for their country.
Yeah.
So they're probably getting paid or there's some quid pro quo there. But in the past, they would just say, the government would say, we'd love it if we just let that Rush guy talk because he's an idiot or he's great. Whatever government was in charge, they're like, at least we know who the problem is. And now there's a lot of voices out there, man. And in the lighting industry, it's going to cause, like we've caused a lot of trouble in lighting, you know, for people.
Well, getting them to think, right?
Yeah.
Getting them to actually think about it. It's a big deal.
It is. And, you know, so I think, you know, what we're going through right now in society is the natural evolution of the elevation in both ways. You know, it's like artificial intelligence. I say there's 50% artificial stupidity. You know, for every...
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For every bit of artificial intelligence, it generates a bit of stupidity. 1 bit each, you know, that goes both ways.
Yeah.
So, you know, but I think that, you know, I think podcasting and subject matter expertise podcasts like you and Jason are doing is the future, where people stay in their lanes, where they don't try to be everything to everybody, where they keep their political opinions to themselves, where they respect that this is a dialogue about light bulbs or contracting and distribution and how we relate to one another. When you stay in those lanes, I think that's really healthy for society. Whereas you take a Joe Rogan or a Jordan Peterson and they got an opinion on everything.
Yep.
You know, Joe can talk about economics. He sounds like an idiot. Talks about geopolitics. He can't even point out Ukraine on a map. You know what I'm saying? You know, and so, I mean, that's the problem with that demigod status but that's going away. I don't think they're going to last much longer. I'll be honest with you. I think they're going to go down. Joe Rogan's and that of the world. I don't think that model is going to last. But yeah, you turned into the interviewer of me. How did you switch it up? You must be a pro.
I don't know. I've been doing this for a long time. You know.
Oh man, hilarious.
At least 12 months.
No, but you know what?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, when I first met you, I knew. I said, this guy's got the gift of the gab. I could tell from your time on the board and that. So, all right. Well,
hey, have a great afternoon.
Yeah, you too, Chad. Thanks for being a guest on Let's Get This Podcast Started podcast. Bye for now.
All right.
Let's Get This Podcast Started is a production of Get a Grip Studios. Do you want to start a podcast? Do you need help with your existing podcast? Do you want to record some conversations or a presentation? Do you want to be a guest on Let's Get This Podcast Started? Go to getagripstudios.com.